Human Velocity X, Episode 23, How to Stay Soft Without Becoming Weak. Frequency 5, Soft Strength. Welcome back, Resonance. My name isn't important. The message is, every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. And before we begin, if these conversations resonate with you, subscribe and stay with us each week. Share them with someone who may need these words today. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, join us on Facebook, not for noise, not for attention, just a place where people learning to grow don't have to do it alone. Last week, we talked about boundaries without anger, how protecting your peace does not require abandoning your kindness, how a boundary isn't a wall, it isn't punishment, it isn't rejection, it's simply honesty about where your responsibility ends. This week, another question arrives. After you've learned how to protect yourself, can you keep your heart alive? Can you stay soft without becoming weak? There comes a point where awareness teaches you how to protect yourself. You stop explaining everything. You stop correcting every misunderstanding. You stop chasing every room that could never hold you. And for a while, that feels like freedom. But then, another question quietly appears, one that isn't nearly as obvious. Has protection slowly become your personality? Because surviving pain and living beyond it are not the same thing. Pain has a way of teaching quickly, sometimes too quickly. One betrayal and trust changes. One disappointment and expectations change. One harsh criticism and your voice becomes quieter. One season of giving too much and generosity starts feeling dangerous. One relationship built on imbalance and closeness begins feeling expensive. You felt this before. Most people have. That moment when something didn't sit right, when something inside you broke a little, and afterward you made a promise. Maybe you never said it out loud. Maybe you didn't even realize you were making it. But your nervous system did. It quietly whispered, never again. I'll never let that happen. I'll never be that vulnerable again. I'll never trust like that again. I'll never need anyone that much again. At first, those promises feel wise, healthy, necessary, because sometimes they are. Awareness is supposed to learn. If you touch fire, you don't keep touching it. If something causes harm, your system remembers. It adjusts. It protects. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. Your nervous system was designed to remember, to recognize patterns, to reduce unnecessary suffering. Protection is part of wisdom, but eventually, protection can become something else, very quietly, so quietly. You barely notice it happening. The strategy that once protected you begins defining you. You stop saying, I need to be careful here, and you begin saying, I don't trust people. You stop saying, that relationship wasn't healthy, and you begin saying, I don't need anyone. You stop saying, I need stronger boundaries, and you begin saying, I keep everyone at a distance. The protection stops being temporary. It becomes identity. The wall stops being shelter. It becomes home. And that's where awareness has to become something more than protection. It has to become discernment, because there is a difference. Protection asks, how do I avoid being hurt again? Discernment asks, how do I stay open without becoming unprotected? Those are very different questions. One slowly closes life. The other learns how to live wisely within it. That's why unresolved pain can quietly reshape a personality. Not because the person changed overnight, because one protective choice became another and another and another, until the protection itself became normal, until vigilance felt like peace, until distance felt like safety, until isolation felt like strength. And from the outside, it can even look impressive, independent, self-sufficient, untouchable. But underneath, something precious is slowly disappearing. Not your intelligence, not your awareness, not your strength, your tenderness, the part of you that could still be surprised, still be moved, still receive kindness without immediately questioning it, still believe that not every hand reaching toward you is trying to take something, because tenderness isn't weakness. It's one of the bravest parts of being human. It's what allows love, friendship, trust, wonder, connection. Without tenderness, life may become safer, but it also becomes smaller. And perhaps that's the quiet invitation awareness eventually offers. Not to remove every wall, not to become naive again, not to pretend the pain never happened, but to ask one honest question: is this wall still protecting me, or has it become the place I've forgotten how to leave? Because wisdom doesn't ask us to stop protecting ourselves. It asks us to remember that protection was never meant to become our identity. It was only ever meant to help us heal until we were strong enough to open the gate again. Somewhere along the way, many of us inherited a strange definition of strength. Strength meant never crying, never needing help, never asking for too much, never trusting too deeply, never admitting uncertainty, never letting people see the parts of us that still hurt. And the world applauds that. It calls it toughness, independence, resilience, control. People say they're strong. They don't let anyone in. They don't need anybody. They can handle anything. But sometimes we have to ask the harder question: is that strength, or is that survival wearing the clothes of strength? Because there's a difference, a huge one. Survival often looks strong from the outside. It looks guarded, controlled, untouchable. But underneath, it can be fear with a better posture, pain with a cleaner outfit, exhaustion pretending to be power. You've probably met people like this. People who were loud but easily threatened. People who looked confident yet needed constant control. People who seemed unshakable until someone questioned them. And suddenly, the whole structure trembled because it wasn't built on peace. It was built on protection. That isn't real strength. That's armor. And armor has a purpose. It protects. It helps people survive seasons they were never supposed to live through unguarded. So we don't shame the armor. We respect why it was built. But we also have to tell the truth. Armor is not the same thing as freedom. Real strength doesn't panic when life doesn't cooperate. It doesn't need every person to agree. It doesn't require every room to surrender. Real strength can listen without collapsing. It can be corrected without feeling destroyed. It can admit pain without losing dignity. It can stay gentle without becoming fragile. It can tell the truth without becoming cruel. It can love deeply without abandoning itself. That's a different kind of strength. Quieter, cleaner, harder to fake, because anyone can build walls after being hurt. But learning how to stay human without staying unprotected, that takes work. That takes awareness. That takes discipline. And honestly, that kind of strength is much harder to build. One of the biggest distortions we carry is believing that soft people must always say yes, always forgive immediately, always understand, always make room, always absorb, always be available, always be gentle at the expense of themselves. But softness isn't unlimited access. That has to be said clearly. Softness is not an open door with no lock. It is not a lifetime invitation for everyone to enter every room inside you. A garden can be beautiful and still have a gate. A home can be welcoming and still have a door that closes at night. Even your skin, soft enough to feel the warmth of another hand, is still a boundary. Life itself teaches this principle. The healthiest things remain open and protected at the same time. Your heart can be kind without being careless. Your spirit can be gentle without becoming available for every demand. Your love can be real without requiring self-abandonment. And maybe this is where awareness begins correcting an old misunderstanding. Maybe we've confused access with love. Maybe we've confused availability with kindness. Maybe we've confused overextending with generosity. Maybe we've confused self-abandonment with compassion. But they are not the same. Love does not require you to disappear, to betray your own limits. Compassion does not mean handing everyone the keys to your nervous system. There is a softness that comes from fear. The softness, kindness does not require you, that cannot say no. The softness that absorbs everything because rejection feels dangerous. But there is also a softness that comes from strength. The softness that can stay warm without staying unprotected. The softness that can forgive without pretending nothing happened. The softness that can love without offering unlimited access. That kind of softness is not weakness. It is wisdom with a gentle voice. And awareness quietly begins sorting those things apart. It teaches you that tenderness does not have to mean exposure. That openness does not have to mean invasion. That being loving does not mean becoming a place where everyone else gets to live while you disappear. You are allowed to be soft and still have limits. You're allowed to be kind and still close the door. You're allowed to be open and still protected. Because the goal was never to become hard. The goal was to become whole. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides, I'm going to become cold. Most of the time, it doesn't happen like that. It happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. One disappointment, then another. A promise that wasn't kept. An apology that never became change. A kindness that was taken for granted. A relationship where you kept showing up long after the other person stopped trying. And at first you don't call it closing, you call it learning. You call it being realistic. You call it being careful. And maybe part of that is true, because pain teaches, experience teaches, patterns teach. But eventually, your heart starts making decisions your mind never consciously made. You hesitate before trusting. You pull back before reaching. You become suspicious before becoming curious. You expect disappointment before possibility. You start reading danger into places where maybe. There is only uncertainty, not because you're negative, not because you're broken, because your nervous system is trying to prevent another wound. And honestly, that's understandable. Awareness remembers. It remembers who lied. It remembers who left. It remembers who only called when they needed something. It remembers the rooms where your softness wasn't handled carefully. It remembers the people who received your love like it was an unlimited supply. So memory becomes protection. The past becomes a map. And in the beginning, that map helps. It teaches you where not to go again, who not to trust again, what not to ignore again. But eventually, awareness has to ask a harder question. Is your memory helping you recognize danger, or is it teaching you to expect danger everywhere? Because those are not the same thing. Discernment says, I recognize this pattern. Fear says, everything is the pattern. Discernment keeps you awake. Fear keeps you braced. Discernment protects your tenderness. Fear slowly buries it. And maybe that is where healing begins. Not by pretending nothing hurt you, not by handing trust to everyone who asked for it, but by realizing that your heart was never meant to stay closed forever. Just because someone once proved a door was necessary, the point of protection was never to end your ability to love. It was to teach your love how to survive wisely. Because a closed heart may avoid some pain, but it also misses the hands that come gently, the voices that mean it, the people who would have honored what others mishandled. And awareness, when it matures, doesn't ask you to become naive again. It asks you to become accurate, to remember the wound without making the whole world wear its face. You've probably heard this voice. Maybe it sounded like wisdom. Maybe it even felt like strength. Maybe it arrived so quietly you assumed it was simply who you had become. It whispered things like, never trust people, never let anyone get close, never depend on anyone, never open up again, never give that much of yourself. Those promises feel safe. They feel logical. After all, they were born from pain, and pain always tries to negotiate with the future. It says, if we stop feeling, we'll stop hurting. If we stop trusting, we'll stop being betrayed. If we stop opening our hearts, nothing can break them again. It's an understandable bargain. Your nervous system is trying to protect you, trying to make sure the same wound never happens twice. But life doesn't work that way, because the same heart that refuses pain also refuses connection. The same walls that keep betrayal out can keep belonging out too. The same gate that blocks danger can quietly block the people who would have entered with care. That's the tragedy of unresolved protection. It succeeds at keeping hurt away while accidentally keeping love away too. That's why awareness has to grow into something deeper, not more guarded, more discerning, because suspicion and discernment are not the same thing. Suspicion says everyone is dangerous. Discernment says some people are unsafe. Suspicion says never again. Discernment says not like that again. Suspicion closes every door. Discernment learns which doors deserve to open. Suspicion expects betrayal. Discernment pays attention. Suspicion makes decisions before people arrive. Discernment waits until reality speaks. That's a world of difference, because one is ruled by yesterday, The other learns from yesterday, without becoming imprisoned by it. And perhaps that's what healing really looks like. Not forgetting the pain, not pretending the betrayal never happened, not becoming naive. Healing says, I remember and I learned, but I refuse to let one chapter write every chapter that follows. That takes courage, because it's much easier to build a wall than it is to build a gate. A wall requires nothing. A gate requires wisdom. It requires awareness. It requires the willingness to open slowly, to observe honestly, to close when necessary, and to welcome what proves itself worthy. That is soft strength, not a heart that never gets hurt. A heart that remains open enough to love while becoming wise enough to protect what love was always meant to grow inside. Here's something people don't talk about enough. Healthy love can feel unfamiliar, especially if you've spent years earning love, performing for love, negotiating for love, fighting for love. If connection has always come with conditions, clean love may not feel like fireworks at first. It may feel strange, quiet, almost suspicious, because clean love doesn't demand that you disappear. It doesn't require constant proving. It doesn't make you anxious every time your phone vibrates. It doesn't leave you wondering where you stand every single day. It doesn't turn affection into a test. It doesn't make peace feel temporary. Clean love has boundaries. It has honesty. It has respect. It has room for two whole people to exist without one person having to shrink so the other can feel secure. And strangely, that kind of love can feel uncomfortable at first. Not because it's wrong, because chaos used to feel normal. If you spent years confusing intensity with intimacy, peace might feel boring. If you spent years mistaking anxiety for passion, stability might feel unfamiliar. If you spent years earning affection through usefulness, being loved without performing might feel almost unreal. But sometimes peace feels unfamiliar until your nervous system learns it no longer has to survive. You've felt this before, that strange moment when kindness didn't come with conditions, when someone respected your no without punishing you, with distance, when someone listened without preparing their defense, when someone corrected something because they cared about the relationship, not because they were trying to win, when someone showed up consistently without making you beg for basic consideration. Your body notices that long before your mind finds the words. Your shoulders soften, your breathing changes, your thoughts slow down, you stop scanning for the hidden cost. And maybe that's when awareness realizes something important. Love was never supposed to feel like constant negotiation. Connection was never supposed to require self-erasure. Tenderness was never supposed to be purchased. With exhaustion, clean love feels different because it doesn't ask you to abandon yourself in order to keep it. And if that feels unfamiliar, give your nervous system time. Sometimes healing isn't learning how to survive chaos better. Sometimes healing is learning how to finally receive peace without mistrusting it. Many of us learned kindness the wrong way, not because anyone wanted to hurt us, because that's what we saw. That's what we experienced. That's what we adapted to. We learned that kindness meant being available, agreeable, self-sacrificing, always understanding, always flexible, always making room, always being the one who adjusted, always becoming smaller so someone else could remain comfortable. And for a while, that felt like love. It felt like maturity. It felt like being a good person. But eventually, something inside us begins asking a different question, a quieter question, a harder question. Who is making room for me? Who notices when I'm tired? Who asks what I need? Who protects my peace the way I've tried to protect theirs? That question isn't selfish. It's honest. Because relationships are meant to have movement in both directions, care in both directions, respect in both directions. If all the movement is flowing away from you, eventually there's nothing left to give. Because kindness that requires your disappearance isn't kindness. It's imbalance. And imbalance always creates a cost. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Eventually the exhaustion arrives, the resentment arrives, the loneliness arrives. Not because you loved too much, because you disappeared while loving. Awareness notices that distinction. It begins separating love from overfunctioning, compassion from self-neglect, generosity from self-erasure. You begin realizing that caring deeply doesn't require carrying everyone. You can care deeply without carrying everyone. You can forgive without restoring access. You can offer grace without removing wisdom. You can love without abandoning yourself. Those aren't contradictions. They're maturity. Because real love doesn't ask one person to disappear so another person can remain comfortable. Real love makes room for both people to exist honestly. That's what awareness has been building toward this entire season. Every conversation, every realization, every quiet shift. Not becoming harder, not becoming suspicious, not becoming closed, becoming cleaner. Cleaner in your decisions, cleaner in your relationships, cleaner in your boundaries, cleaner in the promises you make to yourself, cleaner in the way your heart moves through the world. And something beautiful begins happening. Your kindness stops coming from obligation. It stops coming from guilt. It stops coming from fear that you'll lose love if you stop proving yourself. Instead, it starts coming from freedom. You help because you choose to. You give because you have room to give. You stay because you genuinely want to stay. You say yes without betraying yourself. And you say no without condemning someone else. That's a different kind of kindness. It feels lighter, quieter, more sustainable, because it's no longer trying to earn the right to be loved. It's simply expressing the love that already exists inside someone who finally understands they never had to disappear to deserve a place in this world. They're simply living from who they've become. And perhaps that's the cleanest form of kindness there is. Soft strength sounds beautiful until life tests it, because staying soft is easy around people who respect softness. It's easy when the room is safe, easy when the conversation is gentle, easy when nobody is pushing your limits, easy when no one mistakes your patience for permission. But the real test comes when softness meets the real world, the impatient coworker, the family member who hears your boundary as disrespect, the friend who only values your kindness when it benefits them, the person who wants access without accountability, the room where your calm gets mistaken for weakness, the relationship where your forgiveness gets treated like a reset button, the moment where someone assumes because you are kind, you must also be easy to control. That's where soft strength becomes more than an idea. It becomes movement. Because in that moment, something inside you has to choose. Do I harden? Do I shut everything down? Do I become cold so no one can reach me? Do I collapse? Do I abandon myself just to keep the peace? Do I become cruel just to feel safe? Or do I stay clear without becoming cold? That is not easy. That is discipline. That is the work. Because softness without discernment gets wounded. It keeps giving access where wisdom already said, be careful. And strength without softness gets lonely. It protects the heart so completely that nothing nourishing can reach it either. But soft strength stands between them. It keeps the heart open and the gate working. It can say no without hatred. It can step back without revenge. It can speak truth without trying to destroy. It can recognize harm without becoming harmful. That's the difference. Soft strength says, I can see this clearly and still not become ugly because of it. I can protect myself without losing myself. I can remain kind without becoming available for disrespect. And that's when you know softness has matured, not when it avoids the real world, but when it walks into it with eyes open, heart intact, and boundaries strong enough to keep love from becoming self-abandonment. Peace is often misunderstood. Some people think peace means letting everything happen, no disagreement, no confrontation, no difficult conversations, no truth spoken. If truth might create discomfort, no resistance, no boundaries, no disruption of the atmosphere. But peace without a spine is not peace. It becomes performance. It looks calm on the outside, while resentment is gathering underneath. It smiles politely, while something inside is slowly becoming bitter. It keeps the room quiet, but not honest. And you've seen this before. A family that says, we don't argue here, but everyone walks on glass. Everyone knows what not to mention. Everyone knows whose mood controls the room. Everyone knows which truth would make the table shake. That's not peace. That's fear with manners. You've seen relationships that avoid hard conversations while distance quietly grows. No yelling, no fighting, no big explosion. Just two people slowly becoming strangers because neither one wanted to disturb the illusion of calm. You've seen workplaces where everyone smiles, but nobody tells the truth until they leave the room. Meetings full of agreement, hallways full of reality. That isn't peace. That's tension wearing a nice outfit. Real peace is different. Real peace can survive honesty. It does not collapse the moment truth enters the room. It does not require everyone to pretend. It does not ask people to bury discomfort just so the surface can stay smooth. Real peace has enough strength to tell the truth without turning truth into a weapon. It can say, this isn't working, without needing to destroy anyone. It can say, this hurt me, without needing revenge. It can say, I need something different, without making the other person the enemy. That's what soft strength does. It doesn't pretend something is fine when it isn't. It doesn't confuse silence with healing. It doesn't mistake avoidance for maturity. But it also refuses to become destructive while naming what is real. Soft strength says, we can be honest and still be human. We can disagree and still carry respect. We can name the wound without making the wound our weapon. That's peace with a spine, not fragile peace, not fake peace, not peace that depends on everybody staying quiet. Real peace, the kind strong enough to hold truth without losing tenderness. There will be moments where someone invites you back into an old version of yourself. Not always directly, not always consciously. Sometimes it happens through tone, through pressure, through accusation, through silence, through the same emotional doorway you used to walk through without thinking. Maybe they speak to you with the same tone that used to trigger you. Maybe they misunderstand you on purpose. Maybe they twist your kindness into weakness. Maybe they test whether the boundary you set last week was real. Maybe they say the thing they know will pull you out of your center. And for a second, you feel it. The old reaction rises. The heat in your chest, the tightening in your jaw, the need to explain, the need to defend, the need to correct the story, the need to prove that you are not who they're trying to make you into. Part of you wants to match their energy so they finally understand. Part of you wants to say it sharper, louder, cleaner. Part of you wants to make sure they feel the weight of what they just did. But then you pause, not because you have nothing to say, not because you're weak, not because they won. You pause because you recognize the doorway. You've been through that doorway before. You know where it leads. It leads to exhaustion. It leads to over-explaining. It leads to proving. It leads to giving your peace to someone who wasn't even trying to understand you. It leads to becoming a version of yourself you no longer want. To practice, and that word matters. Practice, because every reaction is practice every time you return. To an old pattern, you strengthen it. Every time you choose differently, you weaken its grip. So instead of taking the bait, you stay steady, you breathe, you let the first wave pass, you answer clearly, or maybe you don't answer at all. Not everything thrown at you deserves to be caught. Not every accusation deserves a courtroom. Not every misunderstanding deserves your whole nervous system. Sometimes the cleanest response is not escalation, it's alignment. You let your movement speak cleaner than your reaction would have. You don't punish. You don't perform peace. You don't collapse. You don't become cruel just to feel powerful. You simply remain yourself, clear, present, protected. And afterward, maybe nobody claps. Maybe nobody notices. Maybe the other person still doesn't understand. But something inside you knows. Your body knows. Your nervous system knows. Your spirit knows. That was strength. Not loud strength. Not dramatic strength. Not the kind that needs witnesses. Soft strength. The kind that refuses to let someone else's chaos become your identity again. The kind nobody claps for. But your nervous system remembers. Some people will call your growth cold. Not because it is cold, because it no longer burns. To keep them warm, that line matters. Because for a long time, some people may have known a version of you that overgave, over-explained, overextended, over-understood, a version of you that made room even when there was no room left, a version of you that answered quickly, showed up immediately, absorbed quietly, forgave fast, carried more than your share just to keep the relationship from shaking. And because that version of you was familiar, some people mistook it for love. But sometimes what they were calling love was access. Sometimes what they were calling kindness was your exhaustion. Sometimes what they were calling loyalty was your inability to say no without feeling guilty. So when you begin moving with balance, when you stop handing out unlimited emotional availability, when you stop bleeding yourself dry to prove you care, it feels like loss to them. Not because you stopped loving, because the old arrangement changed. They may say, you've changed, and sometimes they'll be right. You have, but not in the way. They mean you didn't lose your heart. You stopped leaving it unprotected. You didn't become cold. You became clearer. You didn't become selfish. You became honest about what your spirit can actually sustain. You stopped handing your heart to every room that knew how to pressure you. And that shift can make people uncomfortable, especially people who are used to messy access. Access without accountability, love without limits, forgiveness without repair, understanding without reciprocity, availability without respect. To them, clean love may feel cold, because clean love doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it doesn't overfunction, it doesn't keep proving itself to people who keep misusing it. But clean love is not cold, it's honest. It's love with a spine, it's tenderness with discernment, it's care without collapse, it's forgiveness without self-erasure, it's kindness that no longer needs to bleed to prove it was real. And maybe that's the part some people will not understand. They may think your boundary means your heart closed. But sometimes a boundary is the first sign that your heart is finally being protected well enough to stay open. Because soft strength does not mean everyone gets access. It means your love is no longer careless with itself. And if that feels cold to people who benefited from your warmth without honoring your limits, let them misunderstand. You don't have to set yourself on fire to prove you still carry light. Let me ask you something, gently. Where have you been mistaking hardness for healing? Where have you been calling suspicion wisdom? Where have you been protecting yourself so tightly that even the right people can't feel you anymore? And deeper than that, where is life asking you to stay open without becoming unguarded? Because there is a difference between a protected heart and a buried one. One is alive, the other is just safe. Take a breath. If today's conversation helped put words to something you've been carrying, thank you for spending this time with us, dedicated to those who refuse to let pain decide who they would become, who chose discernment instead of suspicion, and who are discovering that a protected heart doesn't have to become a hardened one. If you're enjoying the journey, share this episode with someone who may need it. Subscribe wherever you're listening, and if you'd like to continue the conversation, join us on Facebook. We're building a community of reasonauts, people learning to move through life with awareness, discernment, and purpose. Next week, we step into one of the deepest conversations of this season, when faith stops looking like religion, not a discussion about institutions, but about what remains, when performance falls away and only genuine faith is left. Every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. I'll see you in episode 24.